Clean up your coffee, janitor. Some of us have real work to do. Marcel Williams deliberately kicked over the cup Liza had set down while adjusting her cleaning cart on the sun-baked tarmac. His Italian leather shoe sent hot liquid splashing across her gray maintenance uniform as the prototype Aurora fighter jet gleamed behind them, its engines being prepped for the upcoming demonstration. The burn against her skin barely registered. The familiar sting of his disrespect cut deeper than any physical pain could. Liza knelt silently on the hot tarmac, absorbing both the scalding coffee and the dismissive glances from executives walking toward the hangar. The concrete runway of Aegis Aerospace's testing facility reflected the harsh morning sun that highlighted every drop she needed to clean. She kept her eyes down as she had for 8 years. "He shouldn't speak to you that way," whispered Taryn Chen, a young engineer who'd stopped to offer a handful of shop towels from her pocket. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the pressure the technical team faced. "I've heard worse," Liza replied, her voice carrying an unexpected steadiness. "Shouldn't you be at the pre-flight briefing?" Taryn glanced nervously at the hangar where officials were gathering. "They don't really listen to junior engineers anyway, especially female ones." Through the open hangar doors, Marcel Williams commanded attention at the center of a group of military officials. At 55, the executive VP of operations carried his 6-foot frame with military rigidity. His Navy pilot background formed the cornerstone of his authority, mentioned in every company biography. Liza finished cleaning and stood, cart in hand. "Better hurry. Being late gives men like him ammunition." As Taryn rushed off, Liza paused when Marcel's voice carried across the tarmac. "The Aurora has failed 3 critical simulation tests. The Pentagon is threatening to pull our funding if we don't solve the stability issues by next week." His fist punctuated the air. "I've reviewed the flight dynamics myself. The problem is in the thrust vectoring algorithms." A younger engineer attempted to speak. "Sir, our calculations suggest—" "Your calculations are wrong," Marcel cut him off. "I've logged more flight hours than everyone here combined." Liza's eyes narrowed slightly. She wheeled her cart away as executives began moving toward the observation deck, faces tense. She moved through the facility with invisible efficiency, the way she'd perfected since joining Aegis as a maintenance worker 8 years ago. Most employees never noticed her presence. Fewer remembered her name. Later that night, when the testing facility had emptied, Liza moved through the engineering hangar with purpose. She stopped at a transparent display board filled with equations related to the Aurora's flight stabilization system. Her eyes scanned the calculations with unexpected expertise, eventually focusing on a specific variable sequence that addressed the transonic transition problem. She glanced at the security cameras. She knew their blind spots intimately after years of careful observation. With practiced precision, she picked up a digital stylus and made a small adjustment to an equation, then continued her cleaning rounds as the hangar lights cast long shadows across the dormant fighter jet. In her modest 1-bedroom apartment overlooking the distant airfield, Liza unlocked the door and set down her bag. The space was Spartan but meticulously organized. A bookshelf held technical manuals and aerospace engineering texts, partially hidden behind fiction paperbacks. She moved to the kitchen, warmed a simple meal, and ate while reviewing the day's observations in a journal coded with a system only she understood. Her routine complete, she approached a door she rarely opened, the only space in her apartment that remained locked. Through the window, a military transport plane passed overhead, its engines a distant rumble. She hesitated, then turned away. Not tonight. The following morning, Aegis's flight test facility buzzed with unusual energy. Engineers rushed between the hangars and control rooms, their conversations hushed but urgent. "Someone modified the thrust vector calculations," Taryn said quietly as Liza emptied her trash bin near the simulator room. The simulation results improved by 23% overnight. "Maybe someone had a breakthrough," Liza suggested, keeping her expression neutral as a test pilot walked past. "Marcel's furious. Says it undermines his authority to have unauthorized changes." Taryn lowered her voice further. "But the modifications are brilliant. Whoever did it understands fighter jet physics at an expert level. The conversation halted as Marcel strode onto the floor, flanked by security personnel. His face was flushed with anger as the massive hangar doors closed behind him. "Attention, everyone," he announced, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Someone accessed restricted simulation parameters without authorization last night. This constitutes a serious security breach." His eyes swept the room where engineers stood beside their workstations. "Until we identify the culprit, all non-essential personnel will undergo additional screening." His gaze landed on Liza momentarily, then dismissed her as irrelevant as the Aurora prototype gleamed behind him. "Cleaning staff will now require escort on secure areas. We're implementing immediate badge tracking for all support personnel." That evening, as she prepared to leave, Dr. Victor Reeves approached her on the tarmac. The retired chief engineer still consulted occasionally, his 60-something frame slightly stooped after decades hunched over designs, wind from a departing helicopter ruffling his white hair. "Ms. Anderson," he said quietly as they stood in the shadow of the hangar. "I noticed you've been with Aegis quite some time." Liza nodded cautiously, clutching her maintenance cart. 8 years next month, Dr. Reeves." His expression revealed nothing, but his next words sent a chill through her as a fighter jet roared overhead. "Interesting. Almost precisely when Lieutenant Colonel Anderson disappeared from the Air Force's elite pilot program." Their eyes met in silent understanding before he walked away toward the parking area, leaving Liza to wonder, will her carefully constructed anonymity survive this new attention, or is it time to emerge from the shadows? The new security measures descended like a shroud over Aegis Aerospace. Liza felt the weight of the tracking badge hanging from her neck as she navigated restricted areas. The metallic click of security doors locking behind her punctuated her movements. Marcel Williams had implemented the changes with remarkable speed. Maintenance staff now worked shorter shifts with mandatory supervision on research floors. Cameras that had previously been static were now actively monitored. 3 days after the whiteboard incident, Liza was cleaning the break room when she overheard a heated exchange. "Your approach contradicts established protocols," Marcel's voice carried through the partially open door. "The Aurora project can't afford experimental theories from junior staff." "With respect, sir," Taryn replied, "the simulation data supports my analysis. The instability occurs precisely when the thrust vectoring transitions at supersonic speeds." "Data can be misinterpreted," Marcel dismissed, "especially by those with limited flight experience." Liza moved closer to the door. Through the gap, she saw Taryn standing her ground while Marcel towered over her. "I've cross-referenced historical flight data from similar aircraft," Taryn continued. "The pattern is consistent with my hypothesis." Marcel's jaw tightened. "The military doesn't pay us for hypotheses, Ms. Chen. They pay for certainty. I've flown supersonic aircraft in combat conditions. What's your experience beyond simulations?" Before Taryn could respond, Marcel noticed Liza through the doorway. His expression hardened. "Do you need something?" "Just doing my job, sir," Liza replied, her voice deliberately neutral as she moved away. Later that afternoon, she observed Marcel presenting a modified version of Taryn's solution to the executive team, with his name attached to the findings. When the meeting concluded, Taryn stormed away from the conference room, fighting back tears. Liza found her in the women's restroom, splashing water on her face. "He took credit for my work," Taryn said without looking up. 3 months of analysis, and he presents it as his insight after reviewing the data. Liza handed her a paper towel. "Men like Marcel don't value ideas. They value control." Taryn studied Liza's reflection in the mirror. "You speak like someone who's dealt with this before." "I've cleaned up after powerful men for a long time," Liza replied carefully. "You learn to see patterns." That night after her shift ended, Liza drove to a small diner 30 miles from Aegis. Dr. Victor Reeves sat in a corner booth exactly as his cryptic text had suggested. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Anderson," he said as she slid into the booth. I thought we should talk somewhere off Aegis property. About what, exactly? Liza kept her expression neutral. About how a maintenance worker manages to correct advanced flight dynamics equations without anyone noticing. He smiled slightly at her carefully controlled reaction. Don't worry, I deleted the security footage before anyone else noticed. I don't know what you think you saw, Liza began. I saw someone who understands supersonic flight at an instinctive level, he replied. Someone who's been watching and learning for years while remaining invisible. Dr. Reeves leaned forward. My daughter was an Air Force pilot. She faced similar challenges to those Lieutenant Colonel Liza Anderson might have faced. When Liza didn't respond, he continued, I respect your privacy. I'm simply offering an alliance, should you need one. The following week brought a development that sent ripples of tension through Aegis. Military officials would be visiting for a progress assessment, with rumors that continued funding depended on demonstrable results. Marcel called an all-hands meeting. The Pentagon is sending Colonel Maya Harris to evaluate our progress. She's known for cutting underperforming contracts without hesitation. He paced before the assembled teams. We will present a unified front. Any technical concerns are to be directed to me privately, not aired in front of our military partners. His gaze found Taryn in the crowd. Anyone undermining our presentation to Colonel Harris will face immediate termination. Is that clear? On the morning of the military visit, Liza arrived early. As she cleaned the conference room, a flash of memory overtook her. The cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, alarms blaring as she fought to stabilize a spin at Mach 1.8, her hands moving with practiced precision while her wingman's voice crackled with panic over the radio. Colonel Maya Harris arrived precisely on schedule. Unlike Marcel's performative military bearing, Colonel Harris carried her authority with quiet confidence. At 52, her dark skin was lined with experience, her close-cropped hair showing threads of gray. The prototype has exceeded expectations in multiple test parameters, Marcel assured Colonel Harris, directing her attention to selected simulation results. We've resolved the initial stability issues and are prepared for live testing next month. Colonel Harris reviewed the data with methodical precision. These results show improvement, but the critical issue appears to be stability during transonic transition. What's your solution pathway? Before Marcel could answer, Taryn spoke up. Ma'am, we've identified a potential solution that requires further validation, Marcel interrupted smoothly. Ms. Chen is enthusiastic but somewhat premature in her assessment. Colonel Harris raised an eyebrow. I'd like to hear the technical team's perspective. Marcel's smile tightened. Of course. After lunch, I've arranged for you to meet with our senior engineers. Near midnight, Liza made her way to Marcel's office. Using her maintenance key, she entered silently and began her usual cleaning routine while scanning his desk. A tablet sat connected to a charger, displaying simulation parameters for the next day's demonstration. Liza examined the settings, her eyes widening as she recognized the manipulation. Marcel had adjusted Taryn's test parameters to ensure failure while leaving his own demonstration set for optimal conditions. The office door suddenly opened. Dr. Reeves stood in the doorway. Late night cleaning? He asked quietly. Just finishing up, Liza replied, stepping away from the desk. Dr. Reeves closed the door behind him. He's sabotaging her work to protect his reputation. Yes. What will you do? Liza considered the tablet, the manipulated data, and 8 years of careful anonymity. Nothing yet. Dr. Reeves studied her carefully. Is that what you've been waiting for? The complete failure of the system? The question hung in the air between them. The hum of computers and the sharp smell of marker on whiteboard filled the silence. No, she finally answered. Just the right moment to change it. That night, Liza stood before the locked door in her apartment. 8 years of discipline had kept her from opening it too often, afraid that revisiting the past might weaken her resolve. Tonight was different. She inserted the key and stepped inside. The small room contained carefully preserved remnants of a different life. Framed certificates hung on the wall. her aerospace engineering degree from MIT, her Air Force commission, her fighter pilot wings. A glass case displayed the Distinguished Flying Cross and other medals earned during her 12 years of service. Liza ran her fingers over her old flight helmet, the call sign Phantom still visible beneath layers of scratches. The distant thunder rolled outside her window as she sat heavily in the desk chair, memories flooding back with painful clarity. She'd been Lieutenant Colonel Liza Phantom Anderson then, one of only 9 black female fighter pilots in the entire Air Force. Over 2,000 combat hours, a perfect record until that day. The mission had been routine, testing new flight control software for the F-22 Raptor. She and Captain James Miller, her wingman, were pushing the aircraft to its limits at 52,000 feet when the malfunction occurred. The faint smell of jet fuel seemed to fill her nostrils even now as she remembered the sudden alert warnings, the violent shudder as the aircraft entered an uncontrolled flat spin. "Phantom, you're losing it," Miller's voice had crackled through her helmet. "Eject! Eject!" But Liza had seen the populated area below. Ejecting meant sending an out-of-control F-22 into civilian territory. Instead, she'd fought the aircraft, finding a counterintuitive solution to the spin that no simulation had predicted. She'd recovered mere thousands of feet above the ground. Miller hadn't been so fortunate. His ejection had malfunctioned, and the crash investigation had turned into a witch hunt. Marcel Williams had led that investigation, determined to find pilot error rather than a systemic flaw. Despite data showing a software malfunction, his report had emphasized possible spatial disorientation and hesitation to follow ejection protocols, subtle implications that her gender and race had compromised her judgment. Though officially cleared by a secondary investigation, the damage was done. Marcel's preliminary findings had circulated through the highest levels of command. Flight assignments dried up. Her career effectively ended. Liza opened her desk drawer and removed a worn notebook. Inside were meticulous notes from the past 8 years, observations about Aegis's corporate culture, technical details about the Aurora project, and evidence of Marcel's systematic undermining of women and minorities throughout the company. Her plan had never been about revenge. It was about system-wide change. Marcel was merely a symptom of the larger disease, the entrenched bias that permeated aerospace and defense. A knock at her apartment door startled her from her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Dr. Reeves standing in the hallway, his expression grave. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said when she opened the door. "But tomorrow's demonstration has been escalated. They're planning a live flight test." "That's impossible," Liza replied, ushering him inside. "The stability issues aren't resolved. Marcel convinced the board it's the only way to secure the contract. He's volunteered to pilot the prototype himself." Dr. Reeves removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's a desperate gamble." "He's no test pilot," Liza said, her professional assessment overriding personal feelings. "And the Aurora isn't ready, which is why I'm here." Dr. Reeves glanced toward the partially open door to her private room, the edge of a framed certificate visible. "The world thinks Lieutenant Colonel Anderson disappeared after her career was destroyed, but I suspect she's been hiding in plain sight, gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment." Liza closed the door to her private room. "What do you want from me, Dr. Reeves?" "The truth. I've respected your privacy, but people's lives are at stake now, including Marcel's, whatever you may think of him." "I don't wish him harm," Liza said quietly. "I never did." "Then why 8 years as a janitor at Aegis? You could have fought the accusations, transferred to another unit, or found work as a civilian pilot." "After the crash, I discovered something bigger than my career," she finally said. "Marcel's investigation wasn't just about me. There were dozens of similar cases, women and minorities whose careers were derailed through biased evaluations and selective evidence." "By becoming invisible," Dr. B. Reeves said with sudden understanding. "Maintenance staff are ghosts. We move through secured areas, overhear confidential conversations, observe patterns no one thinks we're smart enough to recognize. Liza poured the hot water over tea bags. In 8 years, I've compiled evidence of systematic discrimination affecting hundreds of careers at Aegis alone. And Marcel Williams? Is just one node in a network. Removing him wouldn't change the culture. I needed comprehensive evidence and the right moment to force institutional change. She handed Dr. Reeves a mug. I didn't anticipate a rushed flight test that might kill someone. What will you do? Liza considered the question carefully. If I reveal myself now, everything I've worked for could collapse. They'll dismiss me as a disgruntled ex-pilot with a vendetta. And if you don't, the Aurora might crash with Marcel inside it. Dr. Reeves sipped his tea. Would that serve justice? The question pierced through Liza's carefully constructed rationalizations. Had she been waiting for catastrophic failure to prove her point? My daughter left the Air Force after similar treatment, Dr. Reeves said softly. She never flew again. Don't let your wings stay clipped because of men like Marcel. Morning arrived with a sense of foreboding. Aegis headquarters buzzed with unusual activity as Liza arrived for her shift. Security had been heightened, with additional military personnel stationed throughout the building. The test flight had clearly been elevated to a major demonstration. Liza moved through her morning routine with practiced invisibility, gathering intelligence as she cleaned. Engineers huddled in tense conversations, their voices hushed but urgent. The entire project teetered on the edge of disaster or triumph. They've scheduled the demonstration for 2 p.m., she overheard one senior engineer telling another. Marcel insisted on bypassing the standard simulation verification. He's staking everything on this flight, came the worried response. If it fails, we all lose our jobs, the first engineer finished grimly. By mid-morning, Liza had positioned herself to clean the main conference room where final preparations were underway. Colonel Harris had returned with additional military officials, their expressions guarded as Marcel presented the day's agenda. Gentlemen, today you'll witness the future of aerial combat, Marcel announced, his confidence seemingly unshakable. The Aurora's breakthrough thrust vectoring system enables maneuverability that will revolutionize our tactical advantage. Colonel Harris remained skeptical. Mr. Williams, yesterday's simulations showed unresolved stability issues during transonic transition. Has this been addressed overnight? Absolutely, Marcel lied smoothly. Our team worked through the night implementing solutions. The Aurora is fully flight-ready. From her position near the refreshment table, Liza noticed Taryn at the back of the room, her expression a mixture of disbelief and horror. Their eyes met briefly, a silent understanding passing between them. As the meeting adjourned, Colonel Harris approached Taryn. Engineer Chen, isn't it? I'd like your assessment of the flight readiness, off the record. Before Taryn could respond, Marcel inserted himself between them. Colonel, Ms. Chen is still learning our systems. I'd be happy to introduce you to our senior engineering team. I've met them, Colonel Harris replied coolly. Now I'd like to hear from Ms. Chen. Marcel's smile tightened. Unfortunately, Ms. Chen has been removed from the Aurora project effective immediately. Security will escort her from the building for attempting to sabotage today's demonstration. What? Taryn's face drained of color. That's completely false. We have evidence that you attempted to alter the flight parameters last night to force a demonstration failure, Marcel continued, signaling to nearby security. Your access has been revoked. Liza's hands tightened around her cleaning cloth as she watched the scene unfold. Marcel was framing Taryn for his own manipulation. This is absurd, Taryn protested as security approached. Colonel Harris, the Aurora has a critical flaw in the thrust vectoring system at Mach 1.2. The simulation data proves it. The data has been compromised, Marcel insisted. By you. Colonel Harris's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Williams. One I can prove, Marcel replied confidently. The Aurora project has been targeted by corporate espionage. Today's demonstration will proceed as planned without Miss Chen's interference. As security began escorting Taryn away, Liza made a split-second decision. 8 years of patience collapsed under the weight of immediate injustice. The parameters were altered, Liza said, stepping forward. The simple act of speaking in this context, a janitor interrupting executives, caused a ripple of shocked silence. But not by Engineer Chen. Marcel turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. Excuse me? The flight parameters were manipulated to ensure Ms. Chen's simulation would fail while yours would succeed, Liza continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. The evidence is on your tablet, which you left connected to the server last night. The room fell completely silent. Colonel Harris studied Liza with sudden interest. This is ridiculous, Marcel sputtered. Security, remove both of them. One moment, Colonel Harris interrupted. I'd like to hear more about these allegations. She turned to Liza. Ms. Anderson, Liza Anderson. A flicker of recognition crossed Colonel Harris's face, quickly masked by professional composure. And how would a janitor know about flight parameters? Marcel demanded, recovering his confidence. This is clearly coordinated insubordination. Because thrust vectoring instability at transonic speeds isn't just a theoretical problem, Liza replied evenly. It's what caused this crash of Raptor test flight Sierra 937 8 years ago. The same crash you investigated, where you blamed pilot error rather than acknowledge a systemic flaw. Marcel's face drained of color. What are you talking about? The Aurora project has inherited the same control system architecture, Liza continued. The instability occurs at precisely Mach 1.2, when the thrust vectoring transitions from conventional to supersonic configurations. How could you possibly know that? Marcel's voice had lost its authoritative edge. Liza reached up and unpinned her maintenance badge, placing it deliberately on the conference table. The soft thud echoed in the silent room as she straightened her shoulders. Because I was the pilot of Sierra 937, she said quietly. Lieutenant Colonel Liza Anderson, United States Air Force. Her gaze locked with Marcel's. You falsified that crash report to protect the program and advance your career, while my wingman died and my reputation was destroyed. Marcel took an involuntary step backward. That's preposterous. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson left the service years ago. Yes, Liza agreed. After your preliminary findings questioned my competence based on manipulated data, after my career was effectively ended by your lies. Colonel Harris stepped forward. I reviewed that case when I took command. The secondary investigation cleared Lieutenant Colonel Anderson of all wrongdoing, but she had already resigned her commission. This is absurd, Marcel insisted, though his voice had lost its conviction. You expect us to believe a janitor is actually a decorated fighter pilot? Why don't we verify that? Colonel Harris suggested. She turned to Liza. If you are Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, you'd know the emergency recovery procedure for an F-22 in a flat spin at high altitude. Without hesitation, Liza detailed the standard procedure, then added, but Sierra 937 experienced a unique failure mode. The standard recovery exacerbated the spin. I had to reverse the expected inputs and develop a counterintuitive solution that no simulation had predicted. Colonel Harris nodded slowly. A solution that was subsequently incorporated into all F-22 flight control systems, saving at least 3 aircraft since then. She turned to the military officials. Gentlemen, I believe we're in the presence of the Phantom. Marcel looked desperately around the room for support, finding none. This is clearly a coordinated attempt to undermine today's demonstration. He straightened his tie, regaining some composure. Whatever her past, Ms. Anderson has been working as a janitor for 8 years. Her technical knowledge is outdated and irrelevant to the Aurora project. Then you won't mind if we verify the claims about the manipulated parameters, Colonel Harris suggested. Let's examine your tablet, Mr. Williams. As a junior officer moved to retrieve the device, Marcel's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. We have a scheduled demonstration to conduct. The future of Aegis depends on it. The future of Aegis depends on honest engineering, Dr. Reeves interjected, stepping forward from the back of the room. Not manipulated data and scapegoated employees. The tablet was brought forward and connected to the main display screen. The evidence was damning. Marcel had indeed altered Terran's simulation parameters while optimizing his own demonstration. "This appears to confirm Ms. Anderson's allegations," Colonel Harris stated. "Mr. Williams, do you have an explanation?" Before Marcel could respond, a senior engineer rushed into the room. "Sir, the Aurora pre-flight checks are showing the exact instability pattern Engineer Chen predicted. The control system is displaying the same anomalies that preceded the Sierra 937 crash." Marcel's face paled. "That's impossible. I reviewed the systems myself." "Perhaps," Liza said quietly, "with the same thoroughness you investigated my crash." The room erupted in urgent conversations. The military officials conferred with Colonel Harris while Aegis executives huddled in crisis mode. Security had released Terran, who now stood examining the technical data with growing vindication. Marcel attempted to regain control. "This is merely a calibration issue that can be resolved before the flight. The demonstration will proceed as scheduled." "Absolutely not," Colonel Harris declared. "Not until we've verified the safety of the aircraft." "With all due respect, Colonel," Marcel countered, his desperation evident, "your role is to evaluate our progress, not dictate our testing protocols. As Executive VP of Operations and a former Navy test pilot, I have final authority on flight readiness." "A test pilot who hasn't flown in over a decade," Liza pointed out, "and who misunderstood the fundamental flight dynamics of the F-22, which directly influenced the Aurora's design." Marcel turned on her, mask slipping to reveal raw fury. "You have no authority here. You're a janitor who couldn't handle the pressures of real combat flying and now wants to sabotage those who succeeded where you failed." The venom in his words silenced the room. Even his allies winced at the naked prejudice behind the statement. Colonel Harris stepped between them. "That's enough, Mr. Williams. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson has one of the most distinguished combat records in recent Air Force history. 3 distinguished flying crosses, 2 tours leading combat missions over hostile territory, the highest instructor rating possible." "Then why has she been cleaning toilets for 8 years? Marcel sneered, doubling down in his desperation. Liza met his gaze steadily. "Because men like you made it impossible for women like me to serve honorably, so I found another way to fight." "By becoming a janitor?" The incredulity in Marcel's voice was matched by the contempt in his expression. "By understanding the system from the ground up," Liza replied calmly. "By gathering evidence of how bias and prejudice corrupt even the most technical decisions. By documenting every instance where women and minorities were undermined, just as you tried to do with Engineer Chen today." The executives shifted uncomfortably as her words landed. Many had witnessed such incidents, but remained silent. "This is slander," Marcel insisted, "and irrelevant to today's demonstration. We have a contract to secure." He turned to the Aegis CEO. "James, we can't let baseless accusations derail years of work." The CEO looked uncertain, caught between Marcel's insistence and the mounting evidence against him. Colonel Harris broke the impasse. "I propose a simple solution. If the Aurora is truly flight-ready, it should perform equally well in simulation regardless of who tests it." "What are you suggesting?" the CEO asked. "A side-by-side simulation test," Colonel Harris explained. "Mr. Williams and Lieutenant Colonel Anderson will each fly the same simulation with the same parameters. If Mr. Williams is correct about the aircraft's readiness, both should succeed." "That's preposterous," Marcel objected. "She hasn't been in a cockpit for 8 years." "Are you concerned she might outperform you despite that disadvantage?" Colonel Harris asked mildly. The trap was set, and Marcel walked directly into it. "Of course not. I'll prove once and for all that the Aurora is ready and that these accusations are groundless." The simulation lab was quickly prepared. 2 identical setups were configured with the actual flight parameters of the Aurora prototype. Engineers verified that both systems were running identical conditions. with the military officials serving as independent observers. As Liza sat at the simulator, her hands hovered momentarily over the controls. 8 years since she'd touched a flight stick, yet her body remembered. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. The simulation will test recovery from instability at Mach 1.2, the lead engineer announced. Beginning in 3, 2, 1, both simulators activated simultaneously. Marcel attacked the controls with aggressive confidence, his movements textbook but rigid. Liza's approach was more measured, almost intuitive, her hands moving with fluid precision. The simulated aircraft accelerated through the sound barrier. At Mach 1.2, both experienced the predicted instability, a violent oscillation that quickly deteriorated into an uncontrolled spin. Marcel fought the controls conventionally, attempting to power through the instability with brute force corrections. The simulator's warning alarms blared as his aircraft entered an irrecoverable flat spin, ultimately displaying the crash screen. Liza, however, employed a counterintuitive approach, momentarily worsening the oscillation before applying precisely timed countercontrols that gradually damped the instability. Her aircraft stabilized, transitioning smoothly through the critical phase. The room watched in silence as the contrasting results displayed on the main screen, Marcel's simulation ending in catastrophic failure while Liza's aircraft continued its flight path normally. "The simulation confirms Engineer Chen's analysis," the lead engineer announced. "The Aurora has a critical instability at transonic speeds that the current control system cannot handle." Except when flown by Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, Colonel Harris noted, using a technique she developed during the Sierra 937 incident, the very technique that was dismissed in Mr. Williams's crash investigation. Marcel stared at the crash screen, his carefully constructed reality crumbling around him. "This proves nothing. A simulation isn't a real flight." "No," Liza agreed, standing from the simulator. "But it demonstrates that the Aurora is unsafe with its current configuration, and that the same flaw I identified 8 years ago was ignored because of who identified it, not because of the data itself." "So what happens now?" the CEO asked, looking between Marcel and the military delegation. Colonel Harris turned to Liza. "The question is, Lieutenant Colonel, are you willing to fly again? Not just in simulation, but in reality?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Liza. After 8 years of invisibility, she now stood at the center of attention, facing a decision that would determine not just the fate of the Aurora project, but her own future as well. The flight hangar of Aegis Aerospace stretched before Liza, cavernous and cold. The sleek form of the Aurora prototype dominated the space, its experimental contours both familiar and alien to her pilot's eye. Maintenance crews performed final checks, their movements precise and urgent under the watchful gaze of both company executives and military officials. Liza stood apart, holding a flight suit Colonel Harris had arranged to be brought from the nearby Air Force base. The material felt strange in her hands, both foreign and intimately familiar, like greeting an old friend who had become a stranger. "You don't have to do this," Taryn said, approaching cautiously. "You've already exposed the truth." "The truth isn't enough," Liza replied, running her fingers over the nameplate that read, Lieutenant Colonel Anderson. "Systems don't change because of revelations. They change because of demonstrations." Across the hangar, Marcel argued vehemently with the CEO and board members who had been hastily assembled. His gestures grew increasingly desperate as his authority visibly diminished with each passing minute. Dr. Reeves joined Liza and Taryn, his expression concerned. "The engineering team has implemented your suggested modifications to the flight control system, but they've had only hours to test them. The aircraft remains experimental." "I'm aware of the risks," Liza said. "After 8 years away from the cockpit," Dr. Reeves began. "My hands remember," Liza assured him, flexing her fingers unconsciously. "Some things the body doesn't forget." Colonel Harris approached, her military bearing impeccable, but her expression showing a hint of professional concern. The modifications match the solution you implemented during the Sierra 937 incident. The simulation results are promising, but this will be the first live test. Understood, Colonel. For the record, Colonel Harris said quietly, I reviewed your case when I took command of the testing division. The secondary investigation clearly showed that your actions saved lives that day. Your resignation was a loss to the Air Force. Before Liza could respond, Marcel broke free from the executives and stormed toward them, security personnel trailing uncertainly behind. This is absolute insanity, he declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. You cannot allow an unvetted civilian to fly a multi-billion-dollar prototype. I don't care what her background was. She's been a janitor for 8 years. A janitor who just outperformed you in simulation, Colonel Harris noted coolly. Simulations aren't reality, Marcel insisted. This is a desperate publicity stunt by a failed pilot looking for redemption. Liza met his gaze calmly. This isn't about redemption, Marcel. It's about correction of the aircraft's design flaws and of the record you falsified. You crashed an F-22. I saved an F-22 from a catastrophic systems failure, Liza corrected. The same failure your report buried to protect the program's reputation and your career. Captain Miller wasn't so lucky. The mention of her wingman's name silenced Marcel momentarily. In that hesitation, Colonel Harris stepped forward. Mr. Williams, the Pentagon has temporarily assumed oversight of the Aurora project under National Security Directive 4872, given the evidence of compromised safety protocols. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson has been provisionally reinstated as a technical consultant with flight authorization. Marcel's face flushed with anger. This is unprecedented. The contract specifies safe aircraft, the CEO interjected, finally stepping forward. The board has unanimously agreed to this demonstration flight as the quickest path to resolving the technical issues and saving the project. Abandoned by his allies and stripped of authority, Marcel made a final desperate play. She'll deliberately crash it to prove her point. This is nothing but revenge. Liza handed the flight suit to Taryn and stepped directly before Marcel. The hangar fell silent as the maintenance worker who had invisibly moved among them for years confronted the man who had ended her military career. If I wanted revenge, Marcel, I would have revealed everything I've documented over 8 years. Every instance of bias in hiring and promotion, every case where you undermined women and minorities, every manipulated test result. The evidence that shows you're not just a fraud as a pilot, but as a leader. Marcel paled slightly, his eyes darting to the executives. What evidence? 8 years of maintenance logs coded with observations, security footage, recorded conversations, testimony from dozens of employees who trusted the quiet janitor with stories they'd never tell HR. Liza's voice remained measured, almost gentle. I could have destroyed you any time, but this was never about you. Then what was it about? Marcel asked, genuinely confused. Changing the system that protected you while punishing others, Liza replied simply. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a plane to fly. She walked away, leaving Marcel speechless for perhaps the first time in his career. Taryn followed with the flight suit, a small smile of satisfaction on her face. In the preparation room, Liza changed methodically. Each motion of donning the flight suit awakened muscle memories dormant for 8 years. By the time she zipped the final closure, her breathing had found the measured rhythm of pre-flight focus. The engineering team wants you to know they've incorporated your feedback from the simulation, Taryn said, handing her a tablet with flight data. They're calling it the Phantom Protocol, the counter-cyclical input pattern you developed. Liza reviewed the data with professional precision. These modifications should work. The instability occurs in a predictable envelope. We'll be monitoring every parameter, Taryn assured her. The moment anything looks wrong, we'll abort. Liza handed back the tablet. If something goes wrong, it'll happen too fast for an abort command. This is my decision, my risk. When she emerged from the preparation room in full flight gear, a hush fell over the hangar. Even those who had dismissed her revelations couldn't deny the natural authority she projected now. The janitor had vanished. The fighter pilot had returned. Colonel Harris met her at the aircraft ladder. The weather conditions are optimal. Winds at 5 knots, visibility unlimited. Thank you, Colonel. Liza, Colonel Harris said, dropping formality momentarily. Whatever happens today, you've already won. Marcel's career is over. The Pentagon has opened an investigation into his previous command decisions. Liza glanced at Marcel, who stood isolated at the edge of the observation area, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. It was never about winning or losing. It was about truth. As she climbed into the cockpit, her hands found the controls with natural precision. The familiar smell, the perfect fit of the seat, the responsive touch of the flight stick, all of it called to something essential in her that 8 years of hiding had never erased. Through the canopy, she saw the assembled crowd watching expectantly. Engineers, executives, military officials. And standing together, Taryn, Dr. Reeves, and Colonel Harris, allies who had recognized her worth beneath the disguise she had worn for so long. The engines roared to life beneath her, vibrating through the airframe with raw power. As she began the pre-flight checks, a sense of rightness settled over her. Whatever the outcome of this flight, Liza Anderson had already completed her most challenging mission, reclaiming her true identity and forcing a flawed system to face its failures. 6 months later, Liza stood at the edge of Aegis Aerospace's newly renovated flight deck, watching as 3 test pilots completed their pre-flight checks on the production models of the Aurora. The morning sun glinted off the aircraft's sleek surfaces, highlighting the project name and, beneath it, the smaller text, Phantom Class Stability System. They're ready for final approval, Taryn said, joining her with a tablet displaying the latest flight data. Now the lead systems engineer for the Aurora project, Taryn had flourished in the company's restructured environment. All test flights have confirmed the stability modifications work perfectly through all speed regimes. Liza nodded, professional satisfaction evident in her expression. The counter-cyclical input algorithm provides a 47% wider stability margin than the original design. That's lives saved. The successful test flight 6 months earlier had done more than validate Liza's technical solution. The dramatic revelation of her identity, followed by flawless execution of the flight that Marcel had insisted was impossible, had catalyzed sweeping changes throughout Aegis and beyond. Dr. Reeves approached, accompanied by Colonel Harris and James Whitmore, the CEO who had ultimately chosen accountability over cover-up. The Pentagon Review Committee has officially closed its investigation, Colonel Harris informed them. 17 cases similar to yours have been reopened and reassessed. 12 pilots have received formal exoneration and corrected service records. And Marcel? Liza asked, though she already knew the answer. Resigned under pressure, the CEO confirmed. The board's independent investigation uncovered systematic discrimination that spanned his entire tenure. His military record is also under review. Dr. Reeves smiled slightly. He's reportedly working on his memoir, The Dangers of Diversity in High-Performance Organizations. I doubt it will find a publisher. Liza turned back to watch the Aurora prototypes taxi toward the runway. And the inclusion initiatives? Exceeding targets, Taryn reported. Applications from women and minorities for technical positions are up 62% since your story made the news. The mentorship program has 47 participants this quarter. Beyond the flight line, a group of young engineers, noticeably diverse in both gender and ethnicity, gathered for the test flight observation. Among them were faces that might never have found opportunities at the old Aegis. You could have exposed Marcel immediately when you were hired, the CEO noted. Why wait 8 years? Removing one man wouldn't change the system, Liza explained. I needed to understand how bias was structurally embedded and document patterns that couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents. In the process, you saved the Aurora project and thousands of jobs, the CEO acknowledged, including mine, though in a very different form. As the first aurora lifted off, climbing smoothly into the clear blue sky, Liza felt a sense of completion that transcended personal vindication. Her 8-year mission had never been about reclaiming her own wings, but about ensuring others wouldn't be grounded by the same prejudices. "True power isn't hiding your light," she said quietly, watching the aircraft execute a perfect transonic transition. "It's illuminating the path for others." If you enjoyed this powerful story of justice and transformation, don't miss out on more compelling content like this. Hit that subscribe button right now to join the Beat Stories community. Each week, we bring you authentic, thought-provoking narratives that explore real issues with the respect and depth they deserve. Click the notification bell to be first to know when we post new content. Your support helps us continue creating these important stories that need to be told. Like, comment, and share this video to spread this message of dignity and change. Remember, Beat Stories isn't just about entertainment. It's about making a difference, one story at a time.
Behind every headline is a human story. At Beat Stories, we go deeper, where emotion meets evidence and drama reveals the system. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.